Okay, everybody. Welcome one, welcome all. Today is that lovely day before that lovelier day, December 24th, 2020. It's Christmas Eve, everybody. And I know you would like nothing more than to just hear some stuff about UFOs. Perhaps I haven't really talked about those. Haven't really gotten into the other conceptualized aspects of the show that I do want to cover, because there's been a lot. It's been pretty much hit after hit after hit the last several weeks, the last month really, since and I've only been at it for since November. So but there's the monolith thing was kind of touching down on that. I thought that would kind of continue on a little bit. I mean, last we checked, there were monoliths that had cropped up in Europe that hadn't been taken, hadn't been, claimed, and no one had claimed to place. But for me, it's not a matter of you not wanting to deal with serious things or dealing with things that aren't serious. It's really just a matter of trying to make sure that you understand, listeners and watchers and viewers, and that I can remind myself that there's more to our existence and our interaction with both each other, this planet, and the universe, the cosmos as a whole, than our ability to, congregate together, figure out ways to screw each other over, and enrich ourselves, and not in a positive or constructive way. So, I hope soon, coming with the next year coming, there will be even more changes. Speaking of which, I'm trying to figure out a different framework here, as always. I will, for viewers, coming up in the show, you'll see, a different sort of setup. And hopefully that'll be, I don't know, easier on the eyes. Maybe that'll be more visually, encapsulating. Well, who knows? As for listeners, I hope to get some better equipment, get that Shure mic, yeah, baby, and that's the ones everybody's using. It's like $400, and then yeah, there will be continuous changes. Always try to improve, to empower and improve yourself. And to empower yourself does not necessarily mean to undermine or remove or restrict, repress any of those lovely things that are all negative and deconstructive. In no way does enriching yourself, fortifying yourself, sculpting and shaping and forming yourself as you see fit have to diminish, demean, undermine, or in any other way destroy anyone else. I have always found interesting this attitude by A-type personalities, go-getters, things like that, or like it's my way or the highway, YOLO, all this stuff. And it's like, you do realize you can get yours without necessarily cutting down someone else. Now, here's the thing. It also depends on the type of institution that you're involved in. Corporations, by design, right? You're into being a corporate exec. The whole idea is to undermine your opponents, right? It's not really this sort of the sportsman-like attitude. No, that's not the thing. But I digress. The point is that to cultivate oneself, I think, is one of the highest honors that we have been bestowed and can bestow to ourselves, to be able to forge anew who we are whenever we want to. You always have a choice. That said, I hope that's positive and uplifting enough, because it's all downhill from here. We have the failing omnibus bill, and everyone's talking about all of the pork spending that's in it. We really gonna get down to it. Let's go. So the pork spending that's in it really is crazy. There's stuff for Space Force, stuff for sexual abstinence programs, as you can see, viewers here. We got the Yahoo News up. Stuff for tax breaks. There's tax breaks for racehorse owners, and everyone's freaking out because they're like, "Oh my God, they attach this to the stimulus." All right, let's first remove fact from fiction. This is attached to the omnibus bill. This isn't attached to the stimulus bill. The stimulus bill is attached to the omnibus bill. They attached everything to this bill and made it like 5,000 pages long. Okay, so of course, no one on the Hill read the fucking thing. Peter Schiff, who you may or may not like or disagree with, that's irrelevant, but he said, he made just an interesting quote, like imagine trying to read the entire section of the letter I in the dictionary. And that's basically what they presented on the Hill in terms of this omnibus spending bill. And, this happens quite often. The Patriot Act was done in the same way, both the original and the revision. That's how things are done. When you want to sneak things past Congress and get it in, you attach it to a larger bill, and that makes the larger bill, what's already, mountains and mountains of paper no one's going to read, even larger, making it less likely for oversight to catch your pork spending, your Space Force. Well, Space Force is it's a department of the military. So that it's somewhat reasonable, but then the first question comes to mind: if it's a department of the military, shouldn't that be attached to the NDAA? Is it like a civilian organization like NASA? That's weird. I didn't think that was the case, but I digress. What else do we have? What other madness is happening? We're gonna talk about AOC a little bit because I still find it hilarious that she actually kind of exposed herself for the shill that she is by not attacking Pelosi and trying to threaten her seat as House Speaker. And in doing so, she ended up being passed over herself. Guarantee you she's still going to vote for Pelosi anyway. Let's see. And there's some interesting stuff from Fauci, because as much as I appreciate him, he is a liar. And whether he's playing politics or trying to do the best he can to quell public panic, that's irrelevant. He still is lying quite a bit, or at least skewering the truth, as it were. And then, just the global impact of this virus, of the pandemic, of the lockdown, versus the global impact of the industries that existed as they were before the lockdown. Because remember, we saw tons and tons of videos and pictures and articles talk about the effect of the first lockdown and how, you saw like dolphins swimming in Venice, and just the carbon emission decrease was drastic. Just all these wonderful things, these wonderful environmental impacts, which is something you don't really hear as a sentence. These positive environmental impacts. And so, I just, something caught my eye is the impact of the global food industry. So we're just going to take a look at that article. And it should be interesting. Before I go, please like, share, and subscribe if you like what I'm doing. Could always use the support. And, join up on the twitter.com/keyworkmm. And let's get into it. Expected provisions like $2 billion for the Space Force, $35 million in sexual abstinence programs, and a tax break for racehorse owners. I don't know what would possess them to think this was a good idea. Oh, wait, because that's how this works. You help... you end up helping, sex and organizations and, different groups and organizations that are beneficial to you or beholden to you. And you scratch their back, they scratch yours. Let's see. It reads, the long-awaited spending bill passed by Congress includes like $2 billion for Space Force and tax break for racehorse owners. The Omnibus bill, comprised of $1.4 trillion and a $900 billion stimulus plan, was approved Monday following months of negotiations. The bill grants most Americans direct payments of $600, with unemployment benefits rising to $300 a week. However, it contains a number of seemingly bizarre provisions. $35 million is set aside for sexual abstinence schemes, and illegal streaming is now a felony. A provision also states that China must have no role in choosing the next Dalai Lama. Senator Bernie Sanders tweeted that the Space Force funding was pathetic, while GOP Representative Ken Buck tweeted sarcastically, the COVID relief we've all been waiting for, a tax break for racehorse owners. Where does that come from? That's definitely an elitist bourgeoisie thing. This is what I'm talking about. Like and you will read on, because recently de Blasio talked about redistribution of wealth. And Mike Pence spoke about, Democrats wanting to make rich people poor, poor people comfortable, and that they, presumably Republicans, wants to enrich everyone. And we'll talk about why. Not only is that quote funny, but it is a interesting statement in the recognition of class warfare, and also as well how the news and everyone who seems to be quoting it or pointing to it only points to that portion of it and never finishes out the sentence. Not that it makes it any better, because I understand I understand what he's suggesting. Like, oh, we're not partisan. We want all Americans to be enriched and have money. But the way he ended up saying it is definitely not supportive of that argument. At least the way that it's being dissected, I'll say. But Yahoo News reads, the omnibus spending bill passed by Congress on Monday includes an unexpected array of provisions. The omnibus bill passed by Congress includes an array of unexpected provisions, blah, blah, blah. The House and Senate approved $1.4 trillion bill, blah, blah, blah. They need to blah, blah, blah. Come on, guys. $2.4 billion for the Space Force. A measure stating that China must have no role in choosing the next Dalai Lama, and that decisions on the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama should be made solely by faith leaders. Here's the thing. This is more examples of, trying to exercise the power of American hegemony. Although I understand from a political perspective supporting Tibet choosing their own Dalai Lama and China having no role, it's not a place for us to be, one, I believe, and two, it doesn't belong on the omnibus bill. Oh man, somebody wants to make sure that a statement to China is made, right? Somebody obviously cares about Space Force, right? $35 million in funding for sexual abstinence programs that exclusively implement education in sexual risk avoidance, defined as voluntarily refraining from non-marital sexual activity. So some hyper-conservative put that in there. Provisions for a tax break for owners of racehorses. Some rich asshole put that in there. Permission granted for the creation of a Smithsonian American Women's History Museum and a National Museum of the American Latino. Someone playing partisan identity politics put that in there. You can tell which Democrat and or Republican put what in where, and this is very, very hyper-partisan, a provision of $4 billion to the U.S. Navy for weapons procurement. That's a military guy and or a war hawk. A provision of $500 million to Israel and Jordan. So it's interesting. They're just sticking their nose and stuff. That's obviously probably another war hawk and or a Jewish representative. A provision declaring that illegal streaming is now a felony is someone looking out for big tech. And that's how you can break that down. You can see it clear as day. The partisanship is so overt that it's hard for at the very least, as politicians, they're making their stances clear, which is a good thing, I suppose. Before we had a lot of prevarication and a lot of veneering, and now you can kind of see where. And unfortunately, there's probably no way to determine who put in what or who, you know what I mean? And so that's unfortunate. The obscure provisions were ridiculed by politicians on social media. Bernie Sanders said this about, he said it, what did he say? He said the provision for Space Force was pathetic. We already read that. And it's just a bunch of tweets from members of the House and Senate and commentators just laughing at it. Members of the House and Senate only had a handful of hours to read the 5,593-page bill before they were expected to vote. They did the same thing with the Patriot Act, the exact same thing. Actually, did something very similar with the Federal Reserve Act, although they did that on Christmas, over the Christmas break, which most members of the House and Senate were not around. They were gone for the break. But anyway, 5,593 pages. There was no expectation for anyone to read this. On Monday night, AOC tweeted that the time frame was effectively hostage-taking and allowed no time for proper scrutiny. In a tweet, she shared a link to news articles about the new ban on illegal streaming. This is why Congress needs time to actually read this package before voting on it. Members of Congress have not read this bill. It's over 5,000 pages long, arrived at 2 p.m. today, and we're expected to vote on it within 2 hours. Some coronavirus related provisions did not make it into the final bill. Of course, McConnell blocked a provision that means employers no longer have to give paid sick leave to workers who get infected with COVID-19. I think a caveat that should add is that he blocked the provision that for employers that no longer, he blocked the provision for employers that had to give paid sick leave for people who got infected with COVID-19, but they passed the tax break, the tax deferment that allows businesses to basically do it for free. So there's a chunk of money there for them to do something that they don't have to do. Yeah. And that leads us to our next unfortunate byproduct of all this. The USA Today reads, the federal eviction moratorium expires in January. Obviously, that's part of the bill, but it only extends it, I believe, 1 month. It either extends it 1 month or extends it into March. I'm not sure. Some are saying 1 month, some are saying into March. But basically, if nothing is done in relation to the eviction moratorium, it could leave 40 million Americans homeless. This is on top of 800,000 people filing for unemployment monthly. 1 in 6, actually, restaurants filing for closing. 40% of the jobs in major metropolitan cities are not going to be returning. And yet, billionaires made over $1 trillion in this redistribution of wealth that did occur. See, using that term is very specific because it's becoming a household table conversation. The amount of money that we as normal American citizens have lost, and the ability to acquire it being lost as well, and the amount of enrichment that has occurred to people who already have, for some, much too much. But to continue, USA Today says it's safe to say that Shyla Black's life is not what she had imagined when she left her job in the magazine industry in January, feeling like she needed a change. Before long, her quest for new opportunities was upended by massive job losses driven by COVID-19. As Black's finances started to dwindle and the rent continued to accrue at her second-story Harlem apartment, the 28-year-old found herself having to make some choices. You're just told in a society like, you pay your rent by any means necessary. I was ready to pay my very last pay to rent. I was ready to pay my very last to pay my rent, but how would I pay my electric? How would I get food? This fall, her landlord slipped a notice under her door, either pay thousands in back rent or risk eviction. It said, despite a national moratorium prohibiting evictions of non-payment of rent, no one should ever have to experience the threat of being pushed out of their home, especially in the middle of a pandemic. Black is one of millions on the verge of being evicted, with federal eviction moratorium set to expire at the end of January, unleashing what advocates say could be a housing catastrophe of historic proportions. Without federal intervention, they fear, as many as 40 million people could be displaced amid an ongoing and still worsening pandemic. We're facing potentially the worst housing and homelessness crisis in our country's history, said Diane Yentel, CEO and president of the National Low Income Housing Coalition in Washington, D.C. The eviction moratorium approved by the CDC was originally set to end on December 31st. It was expected to be extended through January by Congress. That's what I mean. Some say through January. This says through January. Some say that it was through March, until March. Both are, I mean, you have potentially, if you have a landlord that is going to charge you back rent, and I'm not sure how this works. I was blessed enough to be with my family, and I'm my aunt is my landlord. So, it kind of worked out into my benefit. It's a long story. I will probably explain tomorrow on tomorrow's show. But I left California in a hurry, in a crisis that I was having personally, and it was serendipitous. However, there are millions of people who don't have that luxury of having a family member as a landlord. And if you do have a family member as a landlord, maybe they're not kind to you. I digress. The point is that, if your landlord is forcing you to pay back rent, you have 8 months of back rent to pay. You're fucked. Like, a moratorium through March not only creates more back rent, obviously, but the amount of money that we're supposed to be getting in terms of relief, there's air quotes for listeners, those big fucking air quotes, is nowhere near what you'll need to pay back rent, let alone probably rent going forward. Let's be real here. If you live in New York or California, two of the top tier tax places in the country, top rent, top tax, lowest, one of the lower quality of life states these days, both New York and California, you're fucked. That's not nearly enough, let alone what you need for electric, food, gas, phone, and yes, like a cell phone bill. Yeah, some people's cell phones are their lifeline. That's how human resources reaches out to people. That's why they try and add, they try so hard to push those government phones. That Lifeline assistance program has been around since, I believe, the 80s. But it's only become popularized as cell phones have developed and become more prolific. And then they became Obama phones because, money was given to them under the Affordable Care Act. More money was delegated to that. But I digress. Let's see here. Right through January by Congress, reads USA Today. Go back to the article. Under a $900 billion COVID relief package that also includes offering $25 billion in emergency rental assistance. The figure requested by the NLIHC, the National Low Income Housing Coalition, in a letter submitted last week and co-signed by 1,500 housing advocacy organizations. The least the federal government can do during a once-in-a-century pandemic is assure each of us that we're not going to lose our homes in the middle of it. The $25 billion, she said, was not nearly enough to meet the actual need, but a step in the right direction. And then we have Black and Latino renters hit hard by COVID crisis. In a study done by global investment firm Stout, they estimate up to 14 million households could already be close to eviction, with a rental shortfall of more than $24 billion, a number compounded by the economic fallout of the pandemic, which has put many out of work and at risk of displacement for the first time in their lives. The situation has been particularly dire for Black and Latino households, which are disproportionately affected by job loss and infection rates. Now, I wonder if they're going to go into how that functions, right? Because a lot of people I hear who try to argue about the limited scope of the statistic. Well, you have to think about it. It's very simple. Which jobs were the most affected by the lockdown? And couple that with which jobs in low-income neighborhoods do the majority of them possess? And if those answers coalesce over each other, there's your answer. That's one aspect of the answer. That's one aspect of the answer, right? The vulnerability is much greater, and that's the real issue. And obviously we're talking, and this goes double so for, major metropolitan cities, high urban areas. What do you think is happening, right? You have the service industry shut down. What do you think a lot of these folks out here are working at? Literally everything shuts down, from service to manufacturing. But I mean, a lot of these guys, they're working service jobs. They're doing the IHOP thing. They're doing the Best Buy thing. They're doing the McDonald's thing. They're doing the coffee shop thing. They're doing the car service thing. They're doing your car detail and cleaning. All of that shuts down. They're doing the restaurant thing. All of that shuts down. Whether you're an entrepreneur or whether you're a server, all of that's gone. We have barbershops, venues. Yeah, because now it's coming. It's like all of it's gone. Your clubs, your venues, your barbershops, your gyms, your corner stores, all of that shit's gone. What do you think? How do you think Black and Latino people get money? They're not in executive high rises. That's the whole point of this class war. That's the whole point of all of this. This is why this is happening. You've not only not given us relief, but you've restricted the only avenues of revenue that we have. Like, come on. It's not really like, let's not be immature about this. Let's just look at it statistically. Let's just look at it logically, empirically. Let's use them brains, man. We can do it. And it's like, for example, I was affected. I work at Best Buy, and it all shuts down. It all shuts down. And it all, like, where do you think the money comes from? So anyway, I digress. The CDC eviction moratorium, to continue, was supposed to protect these Americans so long as they met certain criteria, but critics say the order's vague wording has led to inconsistent implementation and allowed determined landlords to find loopholes. Because, like I said about the COVID employees' sick paid leave, you creating a well of money for businesses to tap into isn't enough. If you're not going to force them, they're not going to do it. So if you create a well of money for businesses to use for paid sick leave for employers, and you don't tell employees and you don't tell them to use it, they're not going to do it. And it's like, well, then what's the big deal? These guys, employees have their own paid sick leave. So you're telling me that they have to take their own paid sick leave because if they get COVID working the job, you feel me? Like that, does that sound fucking concrete and fair to you? Well, that's just the way they do business. Yeah, and that's not a problem for you, right? Unbelievable. Moreover, tenants, to continue, aren't aware of the order, and without legal representation, many aren't equipped to follow through in court. Can you imagine being evicted and then having to figure out how to challenge it in court in the middle of you being homeless? Dear Creator, since spring, 43 states, along with D.C., has issued their own temporary moratoriums, but as of this week, only 14 were still in place, with another handful set to run out at the year's end. For Chris Green of Rochester, the moratorium has been a mirage. It's not helping a lot of people that actually need it. You mean like the PPP, where the language is written so that if you have 500 or less employees at a particular location, that allows, and what's interesting, it's the organization of restaurants, the National Restaurant Organization. We read about this yesterday. That campaign to change the language that allows huge businesses to take money that small businesses are supposed to get because they have 500 or less employees at a particular location. Those three words, at a location, changed everything. And that's why when you pass a huge bill that has nearly has over 5,000 pages, that's why you have problems. That's where you get problems because no one's going to read that. And so you can just cram in anything. Oh my God. Rats and squirrels have left gaping holes in the walls of the apartments where Green, 24, is spending the holidays on edge with his two brothers, unsure whether they will still have a place to call home in coming weeks. Let's read about destitution on Christmas Eve. To continue, what started as a plea to address the rodent issue and to fix jagged window frames that left his own and his daughter's hands cut has instead turned into a back and forth with the landlord over Green's ability to pay rent after losing his job. Right. So it's one of those, what's interesting? We just went through something recently like that in my home where the electric went off. Not the electric. Well, the electric and the part of the house went off, but we rerouted that. But we had problems with the gas. We were having leaks. And I looked at my eye and I was like, she have no, especially given that there's a moratorium, you technically don't have to pay. You should not be doing this in the middle of a pandemic, dealing with this woman trying to pay her when she has so many things to renovate and take care of. And so it's a similar issue where they already had previous things to deal with and previous issues with the home. And that kind of was blended into, well, hey, you want me to fix the home, you need to pay me. He lost his job as a line cook and seasonal delivery worker due to COVID. To continue, he tried to invoke both state and federal moratoria at a fall court date, but a judge told him he didn't have enough proof that he'd lost work because of the pandemic, and therefore his situation didn't apply. Right? So you work in a restaurant, your restaurant closes because there's a lockdown. How is that not a direct correlation? I cannot stress this enough. The class warfare is where the center-lying divide is, because quite frankly, real wealth real wealth shades over all colors. So they may look at you as like a black wealthy person amongst all these wealthy white people as some other monkey type with this and that and the third, even though a lot of the developing wealth in the country is being held by Silicon Valley lefty types, intersectional politic types. So, but given, there's still old money in there, Bill Gates types, not to say Bill Gates is racist, but you get my point. Even if they see you as your race like that, they see your wealth and your power, and that's what they respond to. I'm telling you. The divide is not with our race, but with our class, our ability to accumulate and hold and acquire more wealth. But let's continue, right? Stimulus bill, we were talking about evictions. We're just going to still keep on that for a second. As the stimulus bill stalls, says Market Watch, eviction protection and other financial relief set to expire December 31st. I believe this is the article that talks about the moratorium lasting until March. We're going to see. While Capitol Hill gamesmanship suddenly puts a $900 billion rescue bill on lurch, crucial financial relief programs and protections are days away from vanishing, taking away aid for housing, unemployment, paid leave, and more. Trump calls it a disgrace. We know this already. He called for $2,000 checks. And so there's a few things that are going to end on December 31st, one of them being eviction moratoriums for renters. The CDC issued a nationwide eviction moratorium in September. Health officials argued that people losing their homes could exacerbate, right? And displaced renters could be forced to move into more crowded living conditions, which obviously passes the disease along. The order, expiring December 31st, isn't a blanket protection, but it means that starting in January of next year, landlords can resume evicting tenants. The rescue bill would extend the moratorium by 1 month to January. Everything's saying January. And would create a $25 billion rental assistance fund. So that's not enough. That's not enough. I'll say that right now. California's moratorium lasts until the beginning of February, while New Jersey's, because, other states have their own moratoriums, has prohibited evictions until 2 months after the state declares that its health emergency is over. There you go. There you go. Colorado recently enacted a 30-day eviction moratorium. There you go. That's the one. Right? It's not, we're not going to evict anyone until a few months after it's been declared safe. That makes sense to me. There's some more here about the effect that it has on foreclosures for mortgages. Under the $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed in March, homeowners with federally backed mortgages, which includes loans backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, yuck, the FHA, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Agriculture can request up to a year's worth of forbearance on their home loan. The legislation required mortgage servicers to provide an initial forbearance period of 180 days, at the end of which borrowers could request an extension of 180 days. The bill did not require that borrowers show proof of financial hardship to qualify. I don't own a home, so I'm not really sure about the complications that lies in that, but if it's anything like dealing with the PPP, I can only imagine. Because many homeowners initially requested forbearance back in the spring, their initial forbearance periods will end soon. If they still cannot afford to make their monthly payments, they need to request an extension from their loan servicer. Otherwise, the servicer will move to set up a repayment plan. Homeowners should know that they aren't expected or required to make all of their missed payments at once. They can work with their servicer to set a suitable repayment plan, which could include an adjusted rate or a longer loan term. In August, the FHFA and the FHA both extended the moratoriums on foreclosures until the end of the year. These protections apply to any homeowner with federally backed mortgages. Okay. All right. So we're gonna move along. We're gonna move along to some of the games. I just always want to touch on this, and I'll probably touch on this every day, probably next week, and then I'll drop it, because we're kind of part of this, situation that we've seen with like 18 million Americans. I forgot to mention that, losing their health care under all of this. Is that AOC had this public thing with the activist NFL player who's Justin someone. Sorry, Justin, I don't know you, but we should be sorry. And Justin Slayer. No, Justin and AOC and Jimmy Dore. And what ended up happening is, she was called out for not challenging AOC's seat in Speaker of the House, not threatening, to have her progressive bloc withhold their vote, which would have thrown it into like a sort of runoff situation, and anyone could have ran, right? And she did that, claiming on Twitter that she was going to use the power that she had in order to challenge her and bring more committee seats with progressives in them, so on and so forth. By doing so, she ends up losing her committee seat to Kathleen Rice, not Susan Rice, Kathleen Rice, who ended up like threatening Nancy Pelosi. This is what's being told behind the scenes by those who are have Senatory Twitters, and they follow things on the Hill. The whole thing behind the scenes is that Kathleen Rice threatened Nancy Pelosi to withhold her vote and withhold a block of the vote. And she gets passed up, AOC. And it's very telling of how far AOC has come as far as being able to play the game. Democrats on Friday shut down AOC's campaign for a prize seat on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, instead appointing Kathleen Rice, the New York Post reads. The New York Congresswoman had been jockeying for the seat and lobbying colleagues behind the scenes, but Rice ultimately won the vote in 46 to 13. Excuse me. The committee oversees everything from public health to climate issues, foreign commerce, and consumer protection. That was the gig. That was AOC's gig. Democratic lawmakers on the Steering and Policy Committee were reportedly forced into an awkward vote Thursday when some members presented their views on who should win. According to Politico, some Democrats cautioned against giving the plum role to AOC 31 because she had encouraged several liberal challengers to take on her own colleagues. And that's the thing. That's what she was supposed to do. I'm taking into account who works with other members in primaries and who doesn't. And see, she did that amongst the low-level colleagues and not Pelosi. Notice this isn't a quote from Pelosi. This isn't an accounting of how Pelosi had reached out to have her struck out of her committee seating. But, other members are worried how her progressive policies, including the Green New Deal, could cause problems in the new Congress where Democrats will have a slimmer majority. Unbelievable. So there was something in here. There's a Zero Hedge article, so, it is what it is. But Peter Schiff was talking about just the placation that the stimulus is. And I kind of am inclined to agree a little bit. I mean, I talk about this, right? You see the enrichment of those who have kind of fed into the current domestic political ideology, the identitarian politics, the critical race theory. They enrich their pockets while claiming that, and most of them are white. So as white people claiming that white people are racist, they enrich their pockets in a time in which their influence could have probably helped move something like this in a better direction, the stimulus bill, right? They instead exert their influence to censor and divide. And it's just all a big joke. It's all a big game. Because it's not about race, it's about class. It's not about what the thing you didn't have a choice in, but the thing that you choose and become. And when you are constantly economically repressed or oppressed, you're not going to become shit. You're going to become angry and destitute and resentful and bitter. And got to free yourself from it. We don't need to read this Peter Schiff thing. We've talked enough about the stimulus bill. Let's get to the new COVID variant. It seems like it's just jumping off every day. CBS News reads, yet a new COVID-19 variant seems to have developed, this one in Nigeria. So now we have we don't want to call it the UK variant, but it first seemed to have cropped up in the UK. We have the UK variant in South Africa, and also in Africa, we have the Nigerian variant. The Nigerian variant. Another new variant of the coronavirus appears to have emerged in Nigeria, Africa's top health official says Thursday, but he added that further investigation was needed. The discovery could add to new alarm in the pandemic after similar variants were announced in Britain and South Africa, leading to the swift return of international travel restrictions and other measures just as the world enters a major holiday season. It's a separate lineage from the UK and South African version, said the African Centers for Disease Control. He said the Nigerian CDC and African Center of Excellence for Genomics, the African Center of Excellence for Genomics of Infectious Diseases in that country, Africa's most populous, will be analyzing more samples. Give us some time, it's still very early. The alert about the apparent new variant was based on 2 or 3 genetic sequences, he said, but that the South African alert late last week was enough to prompt an emergency meeting of the African CDC. The variant was found in 2 patient samples collected on August 3rd and October 19th in Nigeria's Osun state, according to a working research paper seen by the AP. Unlike the UK variant, we haven't observed such rapid rise of the lineage in Nigeria and do not have evidence to indicate that the P68-1H variant is contributing to increased transmission of the virus in Nigeria. However, the relative difference in scale of genomic surveillance in Nigeria versus the UK may imply a reduced power to detect such changes. They don't have the framework to do contact tracing and to accurately account for the infection rate. But the news comes as infections surge again in parts of the African continent. The new variant in South Africa is now the predominant one there, as confirmed infections in the country approach 1 million. While the variant transmits quickly and viral loads are higher, it is not yet clear whether it leads to a more severe disease. Yeah, another new variant. We'll see how this plays out. So far, we haven't seen the UK variant or the South African variant, which are the same strain, I guess, at this point, become deadlier. So, I'll take it. But speaking of pandemic, we'll talk about Fauci for a second. Because remember, he openly admitted that he lied about the N95 masks, right? First, he said that we didn't need them. Then he said that we did. And he said the reason that he did that was because he was worried about a lack of PPE equipment, in particular N95 masks for, frontline healthcare workers and physicians, doctors, etc. So this is yet another Zero Hedge article, I know. But I follow it up with Vox, I know. But still, they're the only people covering it. Just like I I didn't want to cover it for Christmas. I'll probably get to it sometime next week. But there was recently a shooting by a self-proclaimed leftist. And, as always, I point out the so-called left's violence, the so-called right's violence. It is all in all partisan zealotry that will divide and destroy everyone. And we will, again, like I keep saying, we will be denizens of ashes, of the city of ashes, city, country, world. But yeah, like I said, I wasn't going to do that for Christmas. Be that as it may, that's actually an ongoing investigation and issue. So will probably be more information I can speak about, once the time passes and the articles come out. That being said, did Fauci just admit he lied about herd immunity to trick Americans into vaccine? I believe they mean vaccination. But so Vox pointed out that Fauci said 85% of the U.S. needs to get the COVID vaccine for true herd immunity. That number has changed constantly. It reads, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the Democrat-approved scientist, okay, more partisan stuff, appears to have just admitted to lying about COVID-19 herd immunity in order to more partisan stuff. At issue is the percentage of the population which must require resistance to the coronavirus through infection or vaccination in order for the disease to disappear. Remember, it's through infection or vaccination. So early on in the pandemic, he claimed 60 to 70% was required. Beginning around a month ago, his estimate drifted to 70 to 75%, and most recently telling CNBC 75, 80 to 85%, and 75 to 80% plus. Yeah, you have to, because realistically, I mean, again, I'm not an epidemiologist or virologist, but I keep saying that more likely than not, this is something we will have to deal with seasonally. It's been introduced into the biosphere, right? When asked about it, continuing, Fauci essentially said he lied for political purposes due to vaccine skeptics. In a telephone interview the next day, Dr. Fauci acknowledged that he had slowly but deliberately been moving the goalposts. He is doing so, he said, partly and based on new science, and partially on his gut feeling that the country is finally ready to hear what he really thinks. Hard as it might be to hear, he said, he believes that it may take close to 90% immunity to bring the virus to a halt, almost as much as is needed to stop a measles outbreak. Asked about Dr. Fauci's conclusions, prominent epidemiologists said that he might be proven right. The early range of 60 to 70% was almost undoubtedly too low, and the virus is becoming more transmissible, as we've been reading. So it will take greater herd immunity to stop it. Dr. Fauci said that weeks ago he had hesitated to publicly raise his estimate because many Americans are hesitant about vaccinations, which they would need to accept almost universally in order for the country to achieve herd immunity. And remember, and speaking about the country, the planet needs to achieve herd immunity in order to not spread this. That's silly. We should be thinking about global herd immunity. What are you going to do? Stop like international traffic into the country? If you don't get it globally, someone will just bring it in. Like we won't. I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. But with polls now suggesting more Americans are willing to take the vaccine, Fauci, who said in November COVID won't be in a pandemic for much longer, says he's ready to come clean. When polls said only about half of Americans would take it, I was saying herd immunity would be 70-75%. Then, when newer surveys said 60% or more would take it, I thought I could nudge this up a bit and went to 80 to 85. He's and here's the thing, he's playing it real, but he's not necessarily being caught. He didn't have to give us the goods. He didn't have to, come forward, but he did anyway, similar to the N95 mask. So Fauci says 85% of the U.S. needs to get COVID-19 vaccine for true herd immunity. This was December 15th, so he recently did a CNBC interview, and 90%. So, I wanted to bring up Sidney Powell because recently the leaving or absconding or deposed, whatever, departing Attorney General William Barr is doing things to distance himself from Trump. One of the things he's done is, put it very clear that there doesn't need to be a special counsel to investigate Hunter Biden. And the thing about Hunter Biden, however, is that they've still, done a massive subpoena for him. Now, it can be kind of argued as to why, right? But regardless, the fact is that it's been done, suggesting that at least now that the election is over, there is some motivation, some movement amongst the federal government, or rather federal investigatory bodies, to look into Burisma, look into his dealings and the possible involvement of his father. Because what he's doing is one thing, but if his father's involved, that's a totally different thing altogether. But Sidney Powell was talking about because everyone's trying to get Trump to do special things. Oh my God, conduct martial law. Oh my God, conduct a special counsel for the election. Oh my God, conduct a special counsel on. And it's like the guy's on his way out and he's burning as many bridges as he can anyway. Pardoning just tons and tons of the worst people you can imagine. I mean, they're not. I won't even go down that road. Maybe another time. But just poor Sidney Powell can't get a break. Trump tells her she won't be named special counsel. They're not going to pursue the Kraken Avenue. It's not going to happen. I mean, it's just all partisan garbage. But at least this makes me laugh a little. We're coming on the latter end of the show. And, de Blasio mocks Fox for pointing out that he's talking about redistribution of wealth being an important factor towards ending structural racism in education. Okay, well, yes, but it's an important factor towards ending structural racism in everything. I'm interested as to why it's particular to education. Is it? I mean, the article, it's not really an article. It's just pointing out that people are pointing out that he said that. But what I'm pointing out is how everyone on the upper, I don't want to say upper class, not even upper class. They wield power, which gives them special privileges. But these people are acknowledging to our faces that this is a class war that's going on. This is a war for the ability of a person, of a family, to sustain themselves and that's the thing. That means that we as a country see those with wealth and sustainability as somebody we should respect and acknowledge. This works both ways because you want to enrich everyone. You want everyone to have wealth and generational wealth at that. You want something to pass on to your children, to your family, but that shouldn't be the basis by which we deem people worthy, right? And it shouldn't be on that basis and from that sort of people who believe in that ideology that we get our governing rules from. Because honestly, these people are really pandering, right, to populist attitudes that are now finally kind of reaching the forefront. I already talked about Mike Pence. Mike Pence mocked for saying liberals want to make poor people more comfortable. The full quote that he said, I'm not even going to play it, but you can see it here, is that he said Democrats want, or liberals want, to make rich people poorer, poor people more comfortable, and we want to enrich all Americans. Again, it's how you say things, because now they've just taken this portion and just kind of diced it up, and then it's like, oh man, and that's more pandering, because if that were the case, it would be shown in your policies. But, we already, like I said, already talked about Mike Pence. But I love this. Yes, exactly, say progressives after Pence warns Democrats will make rich people poorer and poor people more comfortable. And then there's a whole huge... Well, see, here's the thing, that the article isn't an article really on the quote. The article is a referendum on Republican Party policies, which, is actually a fair assessment. But the way that the headline is framed, it's sort of in a mocking attitude. It's, I don't know, whatever. It increases partisanship. It all does. All of this stuff does. Vox does what Common Dreams does. What Daily Caller does, dear Lord. So we're just going to touch down on Elizabeth Warren for a second. I'm not a fan. However, I do like I said, follow a policy, not a politician, a person, or a political party. Warren reintroduces bill to bar lawmakers from trading stocks. This is definitely a crucial time to go after the ability of the people, this bourgeoisie class, this. I gotta come up with some nomenclature for them, but it is really like this upper echelon elite, whether they be from Silicon Valley, from Wall Street, or otherwise, that have enriched themselves during this most critical time. The Hill reads, Senator Elizabeth Warren announced Friday she's reintroducing a bill to prohibit lawmakers from trading stocks as Democrats look to make the issue a key aspect of Georgia's 2 Senate runoffs. The reintroduction of the bill by Warren and Representative Pramila Jayapal coincides with scrutiny Georgia Senators Kelly Loeffler and David Perdue are facing over their own stock trading during the pandemic. Democrats have accused the 2 senators who are, and here's the whole thing. Warnock has been involved in like child abuse and domestic abuse issues. Like everybody's doing their thing. So let's not play that game. Democrats have accused the 2 senators who were locked in competitive runoffs to keep their seats of using private information gleaned from congressional briefings to buy and sell stocks during the pandemic. Oh, no doubt they are definitely. I'm sure it's not just them. Loeffler and Perdue have both denied any wrongdoing, and federal officials have not found sufficient evidence to bring any charges, but Democrats are hoping to use the issue to flip both Senate seats and hand them a majority in the upper chamber come January. Democrat Reverend Ralphie, excuse me, because the way this is written, they mean the Democrat, I guess. Democrat the Reverend Raphael Warnock, again, is challenging Loeffler, while John Ossoff is challenging Perdue. If both Democrats win, the party will hold a 50-50, with Vice President Kamala Harris being able to be tiebreaker. And that's really the only way. Otherwise, it'll be a stymied presidency for sure. You're not going to see any movement. But lastly, we will conclude with Gaia herself, our mother planet. Gaia, mother planet, lovely. They were scorching and burning and trashing and all the good stuff. As we tend to do, we want to control things, and when we control them, we go with the easiest route possible for any action involved, just despite the collateral damage. And so that means destroying the planet we live on to make not things even easier, but convenient, right? Because it's not even a matter of necessity anymore. We live an overabundant lifestyle. I digress. Let me get me started. Global food industry on course to drive rapid habitat loss. This is from The Guardian. World faces huge wildlife losses by 2050, which is just a short 30, soon to be 29 years away, unless what and how food is produced is changed. Now, mind you, we do have synthetic meat that can be developed and eaten, consumed, and mass grown. There's actually, I believe, production of the mass harvesting, or not even harvesting, the mass production of this synthetic meat has begun without an animal involved at all. So that is there, but we have to change the attitudes and the mindsets of people in order for that to really become prolific. But The Guardian reads, the global food system is on course to drive rapid and widespread ecological damage, with almost 90% of land animals likely to lose some of their habitat by 2050, research has found. A study published in the journal Nature Sustainability shows that unless the food industry is rapidly transformed, changing what people eat and how it's produced, the world faces widespread biodiversity loss in the coming decades. The study's lead author, David Williams from Leeds University, said without fundamental changes, millions of square kilometers of natural habitats could be lost by 2050. He said, ultimately, we need to change what we eat and how it is produced if we are to save wildlife on a global scale. The international research team was led by academics from the University of Leeds and University of Oxford. The study estimated how evolving food systems would affect biodiversity, and found that the losses were likely to be particularly severe in sub-Saharan Africa and in parts of Central and South America, because that's where all the rest, for the most part, of the world's natural, plentiful resources lie, which is why China and Russia have done all but conquer South America in terms of usurpation of their resources, their natural resources. Africa and Central and South America are like the last bastions of of like forested resources, of like aquatic resources. Everything else is just like torched or poisoned. Michael Clark, another lead author from the University of Oxford, said while conventional conservation tactics such as establishing new protected areas or introducing legislation to save specific species were necessary, the research underscores the importance of reducing the ultimate stresses to biodiversity, such as agricultural expansion. The study examined the potential impact of making ambitious changes in specific regions or countries, from eating less meat to reductions in food loss and waste, increase the crop yields to international land use planning. So eating less meat is part of the Great Reset from the Economic Forum, the World Economic Forum. And in order to increase crop yields, they probably would have to use like synthetic chemicals or some sort of alternative synthetic method. Because remember, to do things to save you don't want to like hurt the planet. You don't want to make things worse in order to make them better. Like in Geostorm, where their answer to climate damage wasn't to hold countries accountable, but to build a giant series of satellites that can manipulate the weather. Authors say this varied approach enables policymakers to identify which changes will have the largest benefit in their country or region, pointing out, for example, that raging agricultural yields would probably bring huge benefit to biodiversity in sub-Saharan Africa, but do very little in North America where yields are already high. In contrast, shifting to healthier diets would have big benefits in North America, fatties, but it is less likely to have a large benefit in regions where meat consumption is low and food insecurity is high. Clark said, importantly, we need to do all of these things. No one approach is sufficient on its own, but with global coordination and rapid action, it should be possible to provide healthy diets for the global population in 2050 without major habitat losses. And you'll probably see a lot more of these articles taking, and it's not like we haven't seen them before, but now, like I said, never let a good crisis go to waste. We are seeing the beginning of life as we know it for the next century. Just like when when we had the Industrial Revolution, the introduction of the car and flight, 2 world wars, these things changed the technology changed the socio-economic landscape, and war changed the geopolitical landscape. Those two changes together changed the world and life as we know it. So with that being said, be prepared for great changes indeed. And, honestly, it is a great time to be alive despite what is happening. Enjoy your Christmas Eve. I will see you tomorrow. Tomorrow's my birthday. It'll be my birthday cast, my birth cast. There will probably be people screaming in the background then too. But with that said, into the ether ever forward. Be well to yourself and to each other. Take care.